Okay, so when we last met, we were pressed for time at the end. So we basically got through the idea of reliquaries, right? Comfortably. That reliquaries are all about kind of preserving or presenting something that has a sacred quality to it. So it's basically making something, in the grand scheme of things, mundane. I mean, the fingernail of St. Francis is not, an exciting thing. Although for the Catholic, it may be imbued with some sort of spiritual or metaphysical power. I don't know. I'm not Catholic. Anybody Catholic? It's special, however they consider it. So to take something like that and present it in a way that honors it or sees it as sacred is something that's kind of the whole purpose of the reliquary. We see this in Buddhist art as well. This is a stupa. Stupas are visual representations of mandalas. Does anybody know what a mandala is? Yeah, sometimes you do coloring books, and they're just radially balanced designs is what a mandala is. But of course, for the Buddhist, it represents kind of the metaphysics of the universe, how the universe works. And it's a representation of Buddhist philosophy as well, or Buddhist theology. The stupa, if you look at it from this point of view, is like a building, but if you look at it from above, it has a square with a circle, with a square, with a circle, with a square, with a circle. So it looks like a mandala when you see it from above. And inside of this might be a relic of the Buddha or a Buddhist saint. This is a more contemporary use. We talked about it pretty much in detail, right, Betty Sayer? And we talked about her images. Am I correct? Yes? No? Did we talk about this image?
No.
Okay. Did we talk about this image?
No.
Okay. Well, we'll talk about it again real quick. So Betty Sayer was in the late civil rights era movement, Black Power movement, so that kind of transition period between a more peaceful form of protest and a more militant approach to race relations. The liberation of Aunt Jemima takes figures like the Mammy figure. Mammy is an antebellum symbol that is kind of a caricature or a stereotype of the black housemaid that would have been part of plantation life. If you've ever seen Gone with the Wind, I can't remember the lady's name in Gone with the Wind. I don't know, she was hilarious. Yeah. I love that character. Yeah. But, large and actually in charge, oftentimes in that period, the Mammy figure not only raised the children of the slave owner, but even nursed them in some cases, like literally raised them. And of course, in some cases, the children were the product of dancing with the slave owner and his slave. But you see this very large figure here, very imposing. She has symbols, and symbolic imagery or objects is very important in the reliquary. The symbol of the broom is obviously a symbol of space travel, housework, or work in general. And then we have the gun to her left-hand side, a rifle, another gun tucked underneath her arm, which is a symbol of a kind of work, violence, or in this case, a symbol of uprising. You have the Black Power fist superimposed over this lily white bleached piece of cloth. You have cotton in the foreground, which of course was the main crop during the antebellum period. And then you have back here a modern advertising symbol for Aunt Jemima Aunt Jemima pancake syrup. You have repetition, which creates a grid pattern, subordinate. It's been glossed over with a brownish glaze, which helps to push it in the background, which helps to emphasize the brighter colors in the foreground figure. So there's a visual element to that, as well as a contrast between relief and a more three-dimensional approach to sculpture, right? So although this isn't meant to be seen in the round because it's in a box, nevertheless, it's fully dimensional, whereas the background is like a tile motif. And again, I want to emphasize this beautiful way that she's explored unity by repetition, but rhythmically she's changed the scale. So that creates more visual interest. I'm not sure what these little things are. It's curious to me. I know this is like an African motif here that you see in tribal African clothing, but I'm not sure what those objects are. So my apologies. Here you have a washboard. A washboard is a symbol for modern American politics. Work, again, right? And cleansing. You have this little figure here, which can be turned on a hand crank and it'll move back and forth, which is a kind of folk art form that you see in all over the country, but especially in the South, and windmills. You see the windmills turning, and the figure will saw a log or do something funny. So here you have the Aunt Jemima figure again, cut out of tin, doing her washwork. The viewer can turn the crank. It's meant to be on the wall, so this is a relief sculpture, as are many of Betty Saar's work. This project doesn't necessarily have to be relief, but it could be relief, or it could be a combination of relief and three-dimensional in the round type of sculpture, or it could be completely in the round. Mixed media, notice, sculptural object, found sculptural object mixed with an image transfer. So there's an image transfer here of a man that's been hung. I find it very interesting that she kept this Sunnyland logo, because of course Sunnyland makes us think of what? Happiness, lightness, joy, and then you have this very jarring image of somebody that's being hung, and then it says Strange Fruit, which is a song, I believe Nina Simone sings it. It's all about more modern day lynchings, and then underneath On the Dark Side. Here's another variation on the washboard theme. Again, notice the patina that she's creating. Patina refers to kind of an aging process that in her case and in Joseph Cornell's case would have been done with transparent layers of paint. So to kind of unify everything by washing over with transparent layers of paint can kind of give it an old look. National racism, liberate Aunt Jemima, right? And then here's the mammy figure again, washing clothes. We was mostly about survival. This is a bar of soap. I really like this piece a lot. So using a suitcase as a frame, instead of building a frame, the frame becomes part of the piece or part of the meaning of the piece. Did we go over this? Okay, good. So this piece is called Migration South to North. It, of course, refers to a really horrible pixelated slide. But the historical event of blacks moving from the South, post-Reconstruction, and into the industrial age, moving from the rural agrarian life, cotton, hay, tobacco, to the big cities to find work. You can see wearing more rural slave clothing here, and then here they're wearing the duds of the urban city dweller or denizen. You have the train, which of course enabled this mass movement. This would have been probably the early part of the 20th century, that migration. There were many migrations from south to north because of industry, both post-Civil War and early part of the 20th century. There's a leaf motif up here, which looks like she just took a piece of crown molding, like a scrap of crown molding. It has leaves. Not sure that that necessarily has a symbolic quality to it, but it certainly does make it a little more special to have that there. It feels more urban compared to the old rustic cabin. Does anybody notice anything about her use of color? How she's unified this piece or created a color palette that's very harmonic. So green, what other colors would we see?
Blue.
Bluish colors?
Yellow.
And yellow. So really what we're seeing is green, yellow green, blue green, and yellow. What kind of palette is that?
Analogous.
It's an analogous color palette, right? Which is very harmonically unified, right? That's something we learn in color theory. So she's, using a glaze of yellow to tint these black and white photographs. She's using yellow objects and yellow-green objects. I bet you $1 million that she glazed this train so that it was yellow-green to kind of create an integration amongst all of these separate pieces. So, you're taking pieces that are not related, you're putting them together, you're unifying them both by subject matter, right? You're unifying them by color, you're unifying them by their containment within, in this case, a suitcase. And talk about symbolic value, right? So the container that everything's in has a direct symbolic relationship to the theme of migration and travel, right? It's not just a box. Here's a little child ship. There you see the washboard has been turned into the surface of the water, right? What else can a washboard be? Well, it looks like waves. Oh, I could use that for a ship, a sailing ship, which of course is going to be reference to the slave trade.
Yeah,
right?
I was going to say, go along with all of the rest of her theme.
Right. And look at what she's done. She's colored all of the baby parts brown so that they have a complexion that is closer to someone of African descent. And look at how she's dismantled the baby, which is kind of gory, right? But what's happening in those ships was kind of gory, right? A lot of their investment, quote unquote, did not make the journey all the way. And then you have these birds, which are crows. Crows are, of course, a symbol of death. Joseph Cornell is another artist that you could look to for inspiration. Cornell was a surrealist artist, kind of pop surrealism. But he's really hard to fit into any category because he was kind of an outsider artist. He lived with his mom his whole life until he died. I think he preceded her in death, actually. Not that there's anything wrong with that. I'm just saying. It was kind of odd compared to other artists of that day who were more urbane and partied a lot in New York City. He was a loner, kind of a hermit. Here you have what's a major unifying element in this piece?
The clocks.
The clocks, specifically this round shape that's repeated. If we just distill it down to a shape that is repeated throughout the piece, longer rows here, it almost feels like a conveyor, like they're emerging from this and then moving down and then reappearing over here. I love how he's playing with shadow here, how he's using these corner pieces to kind of frame, how he's segmented asymmetrically, a square, a rectangle vertical, a rectangle horizontal with a horizontal rectangle in it. He's got little watch pieces here. So obviously, between the watches, the watch pieces, and this decaying column, what do you think the theme is?
Something to do with time.
Time. I mean, for sure. Why the cockatoo? I have no idea.
Maybe his mom had a cockatoo.
Say what?
Maybe his mom.
Maybe his mom had a
Is that a
cockatoo.
cockatoo or a cuckoo bird?
It's a cockatoo or cockatiel. I can't remember what they're called exactly, but they're mean birds that can talk. But another white thing, right? And it's surrealism, so it could be just random. But he loved birds, so you see birds appear a lot. Here he's made this cabinet. But notice how like the wood is aged. Like it's not, oh, it's just painted white. Like you can see the sanding and the grain. You can see little flecks of paint, glue and nail joints and things like that. So it has this aged appearance. The other thing that would be a unifying factor would be what? Everything is the color white, which is another unifying element. Except for that little bit of orange there. And notice there's more orange here. And there's little bits of orange on the dials. And there's a little bit of orange in this. I have no idea what it is. Looks like a microwave to me. But
Yeah,
I
I was
doubt.
going to say microwave, but that's 1949.
I doubt that it's a microwave. Here's another one. This is a lovely one. He's taken a little jewelry container here. You can see the hasp. He's taken piping and repeated it. Some of them he's glued on collage material that indicate civilization, space, astrology. You have this collage of the moon. Then you have this repetition of these elliptical forms instead of circular forms. Of course, these things are like lenses, which make us think of what?
Maybe telescopes.
Telescopes, obviously. I mean, you gotta see how all this stuff fits together conceptually. This reminds us of a planet, perhaps, or a human face, a repetition, but you've got that repetition of the green color here, even in the side of the objects. There's a little bit of green up here, a little bit of green up there. You have this claw holding a sphere. So notice how he's using shape and color to unify disparate objects. We'll move through these. These are just some more Joseph Cornell pieces. Okay. Finally, Michael Deming. Michael Deming is an excellent source of artistic expression and investigation for this particular project. Here, he's used a baby's head, and then he's attached this object, which looks like part of a piece of furniture, and I believe he's used the extruded foam to not only stick them together, but to create a transition so it makes it look like this is growing out of the baby's head, right? Or it's part of the baby's head. So that spray foam is handy here. A lot of picture molding. This looks like a piece of cast iron, some clock gears. He likes to use screws with wires, which always makes me think of Frankenstein. There's some collage elements. So again, you've got painting in the form of the way that he's unified the surface with glazes. You've got collage elements. You've got sculptural elements. So that's truly a mixed media work of art. I love the clock inside of the mouth here. Oops. Here's him painting. You can see how this is what the baby doll looked like, and now he's using glazes to colorize the face. What?
I was saying it's so creepy.
It is. Baby dolls are just creepy. I mean, they just are. I love this piece too. So look at this is just like old pallet wood that has white paint on it, and then little charms that he found laying about. Look at how he's exposing the bolts. He's actually using the bolts as a visual element, not just as an element for putting stuff together, right? So it becomes a repetition. They're symmetrically placed. Look at how the color is dispersed in a way that moves our eye around the central part of the image. This is the Sacred Heart symbol. It's really a gnarly surface in here. I apologize for the slide. It's not that great. I love the way that you use the glaze here to kind of create a leaching stain, meaning, it's kind of dripping. This is based on Odysseus, the Cyclops, Prometheus. You guys are familiar with, yeah. And here, these are just scrap pieces of wood. And he just went to the wood scrap pile and pulled out a couple of pieces of wood that were probably left over from cutting out a circle or something. You know what I mean? But he uses them to create this, it's almost like a telephone shape in my mind, but that probably dates me. He's got these little cheap jewelry store gemstones, quote unquote. He's got this little figure in the middle, and I don't know if you can see it. I can't blow it up, but he's collaged a little eye on top of the figure. Just stuck it on there, and then used this blue-green glaze and then these orange colors to unify the piece. So this is, of course, a complementary color palette, right? And then again, here you see these almost like, I guess they look like little faces or something. I'm not sure what they are. Hanging from the screws. The screws, of course, are a decorative element. It wouldn't surprise me if he didn't take a torch to things. So think about, taking it outside and rubbing it on the concrete to give it a sense of age. It doesn't just have to be paint. Oh, there's a close-up. This one's got to be pretty tiny, yeah? You know what? It makes me wonder.
Otherwise, those bolts are expensive as hell.
They'd be huge. Yeah. I wonder if this is a wall plate, like for electrical socket. Because this is a key, right? And the key's about that big. And if I look at a wall plate, a key would be about half a wall plate, right? So maybe he stuck a wall plate or a wall switch. I'll bet the wall switch is under here, right? And then he's just using little scraps and bolts, collage material, and then using white paint and then glazing over it to make it look like flames. So these are more wall relief types of objects, whereas he also does sculptural objects. I love the little rolled up pieces of paper. These are pieces of leather here. This is based on a Hindu god or goddess. Medicine bottle labels, handwritten notes. Here he's used a jacket. Like he goes to the thrift store and gets a men's suit jacket and creates a sculpture out of it. Probably stiffened it with some sort of medium, I would imagine.
Yeah.
Here's remember Brenna used a paintbrush as a goose tail. Here he's combined an old brush with a baby doll and made this horrific kind of monster or monsters. All right, so we're going to try to do something like that of our own, using our own personal stories as kind of thematic inspiration. This is the last project, so it's due on the day of the final. A lot of people have already finished their animal, so they can begin working on this. Otherwise, you need to finish up your animal between now and over the weekend, as well as collecting objects and coming up with ideas. This is, sorry, I do this all the time. I don't know why. Even though I can see what I want to show you on my screen. So what do you think this girl grew up doing? Playing tennis, right? So this is like a little shrine to her favorite sport that she participated in as she was growing up. So she sacrificed one of her tennis trophies, who cares, it's like emerging from this egg, which is actually a tennis ball, which is kind of a cool indication of growth or momentum or movement upwards. You've got her decorating this box with these white lines, which of course symbolize the white lines that are on the tennis court. But notice how they're bigger and then they're smaller. She actually uses a white line to suspend this. She's got holes in the box so that you can see through and inside. I think she told me that her dad would like give her a quarter for every, serve that she did that stayed within the lines of the court or something. So that was like a little, personal note. Then you've got this netting up here, which isn't really tennis netting, but it reminds us of tennis netting or the netting on the racket itself. Thank you, Jason. And then, of course, you've got this complementary color scheme, right? It's like a complementary with a little bit of an analogous color scheme happening as well. So that I think that piece is pretty successful. This guy grew up with a grandfather who taught him how to play music. So this was like a little shrine to his grandfather. So I just happened to have an old mandolin in the back that somebody had busted up. He said, "Can I have this?" And I said, "Sure." So he took it apart, and look at how he took, this is the bridge, and he took the neck off, it should be facing that way, and put it inside, and it starts to look like what?
A skull.
Like a skull, like a mask. It almost reminds me of like an African mask. And then you've got a picture of his grandfather here. He's rearranged the bolts to create like an outline or a halo around his grandfather. He's sanded, he's scrawled little writing or designs. I think Anthony was his grandfather's name, so he spelled it out there. And I think in the middle are chess pieces, because I think his grandfather also played chess with him while he was growing up. I think I have a close-up as well. Yeah. The only thing I wish that he had patinaed the photograph of his grandfather a little bit so that it wasn't just stuck on top. So maybe just washed over it with like a gray or a black glaze that just kind of subordinated it a bit. But I mean, look at how these are pegs from the tuning head. So he took it apart and he used the parts as visual elements, not as for what they are. But he left them as what they are, because that's part of what a mandolin is. I can't remember what these things are, but I like how they look, and I like how he, has the chess piece laying on the side here. Forward here, he's got that clock thing or idea going on. Now this girl, horrible slide. I'm sorry. Was born to an optometrist father, and her father wanted her to go into optometry, and she actually started school for optometry, and then she decided she hated it, so she came back to go to art school. And in this case, she's taken a book and stiffened the pages, folded all the pages, and then drawn this big eyeball on the outside. And then you have, this almost vein-like tube that's coming out of it, originating from the bottom and going to the top, and of course a chain. I wish that she had pushed it a little bit farther, but I think it's a pretty neat idea. Of course, just a couple little resources here, and then we'll move on. You can type in book art, and you can see a lot of what people can do by cutting into books although I want you to have multiple objects, but there's some really beautiful things that can be done with books, including carving into them and using them to actually hold stuff. Ooh, that's a really interesting piece. It kind of reminds me of you, Marissa. Well, not you, but your art. Yeah, so that's one thing. And then another thing is to go to YouTube and type in Michael Deming. And he's got...
The old masters had secretive image projecting devices that helped them draw faster and better. So hundreds of years later,
all kinds of interesting...
We have Michael Deming here today, and he's going to show us how he uses
did, and now we can move to the next step. Okay, so I have to tell you that this process started by accident because I had a surface on accident this building. So what I have here is a right view of I had a surface that this is still on. Crackled out on top of it, and then as I was heating it up, lo and behold, it crackled before my eyes. So what we need for step 2 is a little bit of white glue. Now here we have the surface we just painted, and you had an option. You could, while this is wet, go ahead and mix the glue in there. In this case, we've actually, through the magic of video, we sped this up. So this is actually so we're going to add glue to this. And we need probably, why don't you figure an equal amount of glue to what we had here. So this is a brush that has a little bit of paint on it, and that's okay. We don't care about that. We just want to make sure that we have this covered in a white glue.
I'm showing this as an example of how you can kind of experiment with creating surface
You
textures.
have the choice of heating this up and drying this on its own, or you can just let it air dry. It depends on how much time. The cool effects that here, knife. You're going to get
This is
different
just
effects.
medium.
You mix it in with the crackle. Over here, if you added a pigment to it, it's going to turn like a pastel version of the color you added. It's not going to turn the pure color that you use. It's going to be a pastel. It's almost like
So you can see how he's creating really interesting surfaces by using heat and mixing glue in with the paint or latex in with the paint. Rubber cement, of course, is repellent to paint. There's all kinds of ways of what I call rusticating the surface. But anyway, that's how he gets surfaces like this. But, he uses air-dried clay, which we've used before. He uses extruded foam, which a couple of us have used before. So I think that there's a lot of interesting, resources there that you can look at by going to Michael Deming's website. Lots of resources. Look at his studio. Hey, look, there's Gene Simmons. So anyway.
So you could go, you could get eyes there. They could, they have the cool, they even have night eyes.
All right, any questions?
Reflective, those are pretty cool. So they,
What?
Oh no, I was like, wait, we're talking about we could get eyes.
Yeah.
Rewind it.
Any questions? Okay. So a couple of you look like you're finished with your animal. Are you finished with yours? If we're not finished, finish up. And if we are finished, then get started brainstorming on the next project. Doing some sketches, thinking about objects that you could use or what your theme is going to be so we can communicate about how to move forward. And of course, you're free and welcome to use stuff upstairs. Yes?
So your units for on the final exam day,
Uh-huh.
that would be, ours would be Tuesday,
right?
Week
And-
after next.
Right,
Yep.
It'll be in person, right?
Correct, here. Yep. Okay?